Over the last year, I have been so encouraged, even excited about the shift of consciousness I have seen evidenced in a majority of white folks regarding institutionalized racism and the legacy of oppression that has been imposed upon so many of our brothers and sisters. I've seen this ongoing shift also continuing around the liberation of women and acceptance of sexual orientation issues. There's even evidence of movement in the acceptance of trans and non-binary gender identities, though there's still a long, long way to go. In response to this, I have selected two very special people to honor during Black History Month. However, before I do that, I want to pay personal tribute to Will Nichols, an African-American man who became my mentor many decades ago. He was a Second World War vet who had graduated from Yale, held an MA in history and an MA in philosophy, worked part-time in the post office and part-time at community college when I met him. The first adult to take this white working-class punk seriously, he spent the next few years guiding, challenging, and inspiring me, as he did with so many, mostly black students. I will be forever grateful for his example and his faith in me. You know, he is not widely known in the world, but I'm certain his legacy continues. The other two folks I want to talk about both operated on a much larger stage, but are also not as widely known as they should be. Bayern Rustin had a long and storied career in the civil rights, nonviolent activism, peace, and labor movements. He assisted A. Philip Randolph in the planning of the March on Washington movement in 1941, which was called off when Franklin Roosevelt issued Executive Order 8802, prohibiting discrimination in the defense industry. Bayard was also the primary organizer for the famous 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. He had by then introduced Gandhi's nonviolent activist philosophy to his close friend Martin Luther King Jr., and he was a primary organizer for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He organized the Freedom Rides, and with Ella Baker created the Crusade for Citizenship and the In Friendship group with Stanley Levinson of the American Jewish Congress and some other labor leaders, which provided material and legal assistance to evicted tenant farmers. He headed the A. Philip Randolph Institute of the AFL and CIO, which integrated all white unions. So how come we don't know more about Bayard, or Bayard as some folks call him? It's simple. He was gay. In the 1940s, homophobic laws caused him to be arrested for his natural behaviors. While he was one of Martin Luther King's closest confidants, he was willingly kept out of the limelight because people were trying to discredit King by claiming they were lovers. Beginning in the 60s, he became an activist for gay rights. He continued to work in the peace and nonviolence movements and led many humanitarian missions, including the one he was on to Haiti in 1987 when he died. A committed democratic socialist devoted to freedom and justice for all till the end. Now, the other African American I want to honor this month is Paulie Murray, an activist whose work is surely celebrated by many who may not know who did that work. Anna Pauline Murray, born in 1910, was a troublemaker from the beginning. Early on, she insisted being called Paul instead of Anna, and her restless, opinionated energy gave teachers fits. Raised by her aunt and grandparents after her mother died of a cerebral hemorrhage and her father was later beaten to death with a baseball bat by a white guard in a mental hospital. Her grandmother was a survivor of slavery, whose mother was raped by the master's son. Paulie's grandfather was the child of abolitionists who palled around with Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, and he fought for the Union in the Civil War. The family supported her as she blew through school, graduating at 15. It was around then that she fully realized the system she was in North Carolina. Though as a child, she refused to ride segregated streetcars or go to segregated movie theaters. A couple years later, she entered Hunter College in New York City, and while there met both Langston Hughes and an elderly W.E.B. Du Bois, and went to lectures for civil rights activist Mary McLeod Bethune. She also got involved in the labor movement. On a trip back to North Carolina, she and a friend, after having just discussed Gandhi and nonviolent revolution, were confronted by a bus driver for not sitting back far enough in the bus. And of course, Paulie and her friend refused to move and ended up in a jail cell in Virginia. Shortly after that, she got involved in fighting for Odell Waller, a black sharecropper who had shot a white man in self-defense and was faced with the death penalty. She became good friends with Eleanor Roosevelt, who was involved too. She also met Thurgood Marshall and Leon Ransom, who were so impressed with her that Marshall recommended her, and Ransom got her a scholarship to go to Howard, where she received her Juris Doctorate. Unfortunately, they lost Odell Waller's case, and he was executed. Shortly after she graduated, the Methodist Church asked her to do a survey of segregation laws throughout the country, figuring it would be a pamphlet. It turned into a 700-page book that the ACLU distributed. Thurgood Marshall called it the Bible and kept dozens of copies at the NAACP offices. It played a major part in the school integration case, Brown versus the Board of Education. Because she was usually the first African American and the first woman everywhere she went, it was natural that she would be involved in both causes. By the 1960s, she was actively fighting for women's rights. She started NOW, the National Organization of Women, with Betty Friedan. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg soon used Paulie's legal thesis as part of her landmark case for women's rights argued before the Supreme Court. Now, the irony here is that Paulie never saw herself as a woman. Her aunt had called her a boyish girl when she was young. She always felt like she was a man in a woman's body. She never felt comfortable making love with men, but she did not think of herself as a lesbian, though she had an almost 30-year relationship with her soulmate until her lover died. After that, Paulie had one more project to do. She went back to school again and was ordained as the first woman Episcopalian priest, and devoted the remaining years of her life to her ministry. So this is Black History Month. We are celebrating people who are remembered contributors to the cause of freedom. But you know, there are so many wonderful people who have endured and gone on, have fought and struggled and survived, and may be only remembered by family and close friends. That doesn't make their contributions any less important. I'm proud to have the chance to contribute to their celebrations. This is River Smith with a comment for Satyagraha, Liberation Brew, and TroublemakingPunk.org.